Thanks, Chair, and you're very welcome to all of the witnesses and to Mr. Backhurst in particular. Kevin, you mentioned your dealings with staff in a response earlier and your interactions with them. On my way down here to the committee room, Emma O'Kelly of the NUJ branch and your education correspondent was on the news at 1 with Brian Dobson, and she was expressing the worries of the staff following your announcement of a recruitment freeze, and she was seeking clarification about that. And she said, and I quote, "Once again, the ordinary workers are bearing the brunt for a crisis they didn't cause. It was a governance crisis, it was caused at the top, but the ordinary workers are bearing the brunt." They're powerful words from a senior journalist in this country and one that has the respect of the public. My question is Emma O'Kelly right, Kevin? Will ordinary journalists in your organisation bear the brunt now for what has happened, of this mess, this lack of governance, and at a period in a time when top execs are still getting a reinstatement of their pay and ex-presenters are going off into the sunset? Is Emma right?
If I have anything to do with it, she won't be right about it. I should say, as you know, part of my priority has been engaging with the staff and with the unions, and that also includes with Emma. We are having to make tough decisions because of the position the organisation is in, and part of the reason that we have to make decisions early and that it's important that we preserve the cash we do is so we do not have to get into a position of looking down the barrel of a gun with compulsory redundancies. And I've been asked about that I've attended over 30 staff meetings at RT in the last few weeks. And one of the questions that always comes up is, are you going to impose compulsory redundancies? And I've said, I will do everything in my power to make sure we don't get to that point, because that is ultimate. I do not want to get there. I don't think government would be keen to sign that off either, and we'd have to get permission from them too. But that would be the final thing that we would ever want to get to. So, I think it is true. I've said this to all the staff meetings I've attended. They have, during this period, they have carried the reputation of the organisation on their shoulders. And I've used those words in a number of the meetings because they have. The news teams, which Emma's part of, the current affairs teams, the sports teams in recent days have produced fantastic output. And they've carried on working through this when it's been extremely difficult. And they've been having to deal with a number of news stories almost every day about their own organisation, which I know from my own background in news that's pretty testing, but they've done it with extreme professionalism and commitment, and I've said to them face to face, I'm very grateful. So the answer is, I'm afraid they are sharing some of the pain because we're all taking pain at the moment because of the financial challenge facing us.
Okay. The recruitment freeze is obviously a stabilisation measure. You said you don't want to impose mandatory staff cuts. Will there be a process of voluntary redundancies offered? And when you're looking at your headcount within RTE, because I think, and we've spoken about this loss of confidence from the public, because the public are looking at a very small portion of the RTE high earners, many of whom are not staff members like Emma O'Kelly, and they're looking at where those cost-saving measures can be made. So in that respect, I think that's the essence of our words. That it's not going to be on the journalist who's on 50 or 60,000 working in the behind the scenes, as opposed to a top presenter who might do a couple of hours a week, but it's on $250,000 a year. And where you will direct that freeze and those maybe voluntary redundancies before you have to impose mandatory staff redundancies that are going to fall on just ordinary journalists.
Look, again, this will be part, and I hope to give a certain amount of detail in October on the detailed plan. Well, as much detail as we can give at that stage, but part of the plan will be a smaller organisation, and one of the ways of achieving that is through voluntary paid redundancies and targeted redundancies.
Okay, and within that, what would be the potential headcount of voluntary redundancies? Conscious of, Emma also made the point in her interview with Brian Dobson that they do not have enough staff at the moment within news and current affairs to actually cover the output that is required. That has an impact on what RT coverage can do. And then that they actually, in terms of even allowing for annual leave. So, I mean, obviously, the voluntary redundancies, that's why I've asked you in terms of where you're actually seeking to make those cost-saving measures.
Well, I think it's pretty well publicised. I'm already trying to deal with some of the top salaries, and I've already dealt with one or two, and that's an ongoing process. I've already said as some of the top salaries come up, we will review them and we'll be transparent about the salaries we're paying so that we can be judged on that.
And just a very quick comment on, because he did mention about areas where this is going to impact things like the outside broadcasting units, stuff like that, because obviously that costs a lot of money. Where else are the impact and investments? You said about moving outside of Dublin, and there were plans for its loan and so forth. Where else is this going to hit RT in terms of those cost-saving measures?
In terms of these cost savings
Yes.
now, we'll work it through. I mean, part of it is about outside broadcasts. We have a range of other...
What would that impact? Is that specifically sport or...?
It could be sport, it could be other live events. We've got to look at everything.
Okay.
I'm very mindful we've got party conferences coming up. These all cost a lot of money to cover live, and they're an important part of our remit. But we are now in a position where we're having to make some very tough choices.
Okay.
Can I just return to your point about Emma and the news teams not having enough people? And I'm sure that's true. They work extremely hard. I do think part of going forward, we're going to have to make some choices as well about the programming we do and the number of services we have, because we're going to have fewer staff. We cannot carry on doing everything we're doing at the moment. And that's in recognition of the stretch that staff are under.
Okay. You made quite a combative statement this afternoon, and I don't mind that, because there's been politicians out making quite combative statements. Well, going to sell the studio from under your feet, have you filming in a car park. But you've warned us here of, in your statement, the demise of Radio Telefís Éireann if we didn't work together, politicians and RT, collaboratively, and publish the plans for the reform of the licence, which in fairness to RT have called for on many years before this. But you would have heard the Finance Minister yesterday, Michael McGrath, quite clearly when he said that a state-supported body looking to the Exchequer for funding rarely gets everything they want. So given that your full strategic reform and transformation plan will not be ready until the end of this year, will that plan have taken account of the anticipated growing losses if they're running at €1 million a week, which will accrue in the next 14 weeks till Christmas, if people continue this trajectory of not renewing their licence? Or is your plan based on reform going forward from January 2024, and that you're still going to be looking for that payment of 55 million to plug the hole at this moment in time?
Well, the plan will be costed as best it can be when we reveal it in October, and then in much more detail.
Will it be published? Will the framework plan be published before budget day?
That's my intent at the moment.
Okay, so you would have within that framework plan a ballpark figure then,
yes,
beyond what we have at the moment,
yes,
in terms of both, yes, this year and as you said, projected for next year.
Look, I think, Senator, it's very important. I think that we need to separate these two things. We have the immediate running the organisation for this year and next year. The strategy will be costed, but a lot of what's going to be in the strategy are not things we can achieve by the beginning of 2024 or even by the middle of 24. So if we're looking at selling part or all of Donnybrook, if we're looking at other places around the country we want to move to and invest in, if we're looking at some form of targeted reshaping of the organisation, these are things that take not weeks, not months, but they take years to achieve. And a lot of it, they have a price tag, and we'll set that out, because if we're going to go through a redundancy programme which is voluntary redundancies, which is the only thing that I really would want to do, that has a price tag, and it's not cheap to do it. And frankly, we can't afford to do it now. If I wanted to make voluntary redundancies now, we can't afford it. Okay,
I appreciate in terms of separating the different things. I'm also, and you are as well, an extremely savvy professional to be able to read the mood music emanating from senior cabinet members, okay, which is where the decisions are going to be made. They're not going to be made in this committee room. They're between Minister Martin, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, the cabinet in achieving what you want to do. And there seems to be a game of chicken and egg going on here in terms of cabinet looking for the demonstrable actions from RTE before those actions are taken. My fear, from just as a member of the public looking in, is there's going to be a standoff here.
Yeah, I'm working as hard as I can to avoid a standoff. I'm trying to give them as much information. Look, I'm taking action as quickly as I can. We've done quite a lot in 8 weeks so far, and I brought forward that strategy because I know that the public, the politicians, and the government in particular need a plan before they can even start to address long-term public funding. So I'm doing everything in my power.
Okay, and as part of that, again, things like Montrose become nearly like a lightning rod, and it becomes an easy thing for people to say, sell Montrose, that will solve your problems. And we've got a demonstrable example of something that you've done to sell that. But of course, you sell it once, it's gone.
Correct.
It's gone.
Correct.
So within that, but it is clear from your comments here today that it is part of your rescue plan, because you said doing nothing wasn't an option.
Correct.
Can I ask you, have you looked at scoping potential sites in the further reaches of Dublin if the full sale was on, and what RTE would require to operate efficiently?
Yes, we have looked at that. We're looking at all options. I would say selling the site in Donnybrook sounds like a great instant solution, and we've priced up. We're getting an estimate now for a latest valuation on it, but we've also priced up what it would cost to move to new premises to provide the kind of broadcast we want. And
on that, can I just ask, because there has been work done on the RTE campus in providing new radio facilities for Morning Ireland and Late Debate broadcast from. What has been the cost of that investment at that end of the campus, away from the old radio centre?
Yeah, well, it's been millions. Mm-hmm. And the new radio studios are fantastic, and the old ones are falling apart. We're still having to use at the moment. And unfortunately, one of the things that I've had to stop spending on for the moment is refitting some of the old radio studios where the sound mixer desks are not working on, but they're expensive to replace as well. So these are the kind of choices we're having to take. I
suppose equally, and this is where it becomes a debating point in the public, is that you come to RTE and you come to a reception area that is the size of a hotel in New York. You go to Virgin Media and you enter a reception area the size of a semi-D bed in the city, but because they are operating as a lean unit. That is what every inch of that studio is practical use. It is not. So within the partial sell-off, have you identified how RTE could operate on that site?
Yes.
Okay, and is it, from your perspective, the plan would be to remain on Montrose on a slimmed down version?
Not necessarily. All options are on the table.
Okay. Since we've seen you last here, we've obviously had the departure of Ryan Tubridy from RTE. One of the key things that was debated during these meetings when Mr Tubridy appeared before us was obviously the issue of the €150,000 payments. And just to put into that context, because some people have kind of said, like, this isn't a huge amount of money. It's 937 TV licences when we're losing a considerable, so it is. Now, he did say at this committee that he would repay that money if the events to which he was being paid that money, and he got it in advance before he'd done any events, were not done. They're clearly not going to happen now and be conducted by Mr Tubridy. Has there been a payment plan put in place for RT to recoup that money, and not a small amount of money?
The answer is no. I asked him about that money. I said it in the previous committee I appeared in that I thought we don't have a legal mechanism to get it back because it was agreed by RT, but I think there's a moral case there. I asked him about it. It was in your documents that it was part of the proposed deal if he came back, that he was agreeing, if he came back, to repay that money. That's what I can say about it.
Absolutely. But at the time that Mr Tubridy at this particular committee room said he would repay the money if he did not conduct the events for RTE, he didn't know whether he'd have a job or not. Something he said himself. He says, I don't know if I'm going to have a job come this Friday. It turns out he didn't have a job. But he did say, prior to knowing and having those contract negotiations with you, that those would €150,000 be written off over 2 years. He said he was going to return the money. Is there not a moral duty on RT to pursue Mr Tubridy as well for that money?
Well, as I say, we have no legal tools to pursue him. I've said what I have to say about it, which is, I think there's a moral case to pay it back. But I also understand that, as a result of where negotiations went, Ryan doesn't have a source of income at the moment.
Okay. So. And has there been any contact, legal or otherwise, from Mr Tubridy or his agent, Noel Kelly, since those talks ceased?
Yes.
And what have those talks been centred on? Is it a case of still pursuing a scenario where Mr Tubridy would re-enter the organisation?
No.
Have there been on scenarios to do with payments owed from RTE to Mr Tubridy?
Payments owed from RT to Mr Tubridy. There's been legal correspondence just about the ending of the contract.
Okay.
I can't go into further details.
Okay. Are the monies outstanding still from RT to Mr Tubridy at this stage?
Not as far as we're concerned, no.
Okay. And has there been any threat of legal action by Mr Kelly in respect of him, I suppose, being frozen out by you in terms of not negotiating with him and his top talent?
No, he's not been frozen out by me. In fact, I've openly said to a number of people that they're free to use whichever agents they want to. It's just my personal choice. I'm not negotiating with Noel Kelly.
Okay. Just finally, just to members of the board, and I see Ian Keogh down there, you're in my line of vision, so I'll pick on you, Ian. You've obviously worked in RTE. You're now on the board. Can I just ask you your view as a board member in terms of everything that has transpired here over the last number of months, both within the organisation and at these committee hearings, and your feelings on this and your role and the board's role in this process?
Thank you, Senator. Just a couple of points. I'll try and keep it brief. I think we've seen the best of RTE, but unfortunately we've also seen the worst of RTE. I think as the Chair described it, the events have been unseemly, and it's portrayed RTE in a really bad light, rightly so. But I think when you mention Emma Kelly, and I look at all, and I'm a journalist by trade, when I look at all the work that the journalists have done in RTE to pursue the story vigorously and not turn a blind eye to it, I think they've showed, a level of professionalism that, as a board member, I think as members of the interim leadership team here, everyone's really proud that they've pursued that. I think overall, just looking at it from a very big picture point of view, with what's happened, Senator, there's been enough blame to go around, and the board has to own an element of that blame as well. But the one thing I will say is that when we learned about this in March, when we first got calls that there may be an issue around €275,000 invoices, we didn't back down, and we pursued it, and we kept on pursuing it, and we put all of that information into the public as quickly and as transparently as we possibly could, knowing, and we all knew, that it would have significant reputational consequences for the organisation. But as a board, we felt it was the right thing to do. My time on the board is coming to an end in the coming weeks, and it's at that point you reflect upon where the organisation is. I do hope, going forward, as the Chair said, that we can have a real dialogue about what sort of public service broadcaster we want in this country. And once we decide upon that, then we can have the conversation about how we fund it. But those conversations need to be had. They need to be had. It's not just a case of RTE deciding it. It needs stakeholder engagement. It needs buy-in from policymakers, from legislators, from the department, the public, crucially as well. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Two things. One, to follow up on that in terms of your position on that and the buy-in by the public. Do you feel that the transformation plan from Mr Backhurst needs to be published first before Cabinet would make a decision in terms of whether they move to a media charge on each home, the 2.1 million homes in this country, and that revenue will be collecting that to ensure that money comes in? And what actions would also RTE have to take to make sure that there is that public buy-in? Because at the moment, the public have obviously a large portion of the public have made their decision. And so now we're moving from a scenario of governing by consent to enforcing something that will be collected by revenue.
No, absolutely. And I think RTE last year, we hear a lot of rhetoric about bailouts. It was acknowledged last year in last year's budget that RTE required interim funding to the tune of 15 million after the Commission's on the Future of Media's main recommendation around funding for RTE was rejected. So it's always been accepted that RTE needs interim government funding. Now, interim can be, in this particular case, seems to be multi-year until a mechanism has come up that we can replace it. If I was government, of course I would like to see the plan before I move beyond into a longer term structure of how RTE is financed, be it through a media charge, be it through the revenue collecting, the licence fee, be it, there's multiple different, and they're all outlined by the Commission's report, the different options that are on the table. But I have to say I'm utterly impressed with the work that the new Director General has put in to try and engage with government to outline in a transparent and open way where he wants to drive the organisation, and he's been assisted by the Chair in that. And it's a level of openness and it's a level of transparency that, having sat on the board for 5 years, that I haven't been accustomed to, and I'm delighted to see it out there.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, well that brings us